My wife said while sitting in a quiet library in Boston. I think I lost myself somewhere in this marriage. I encouraged her reflection, accepted a long-term project abroad, and over time she discovered rediscovery doesn't always lead back to familiar places. I think I lost myself somewhere in this marriage. She said it so quietly that for a moment I thought I'd misheard her. We were sitting in the back corner of the Boston Public Library on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The kind of afternoon where the light comes through those tall arched windows at exactly the right angle and everything looks like it belongs inside a painting. She had a half-finished cup of tea going cold in front of her. I had a book I hadn't actually read a single word of in 40 minutes. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was just sitting there with this look on her face that I can only describe as exhausted in a very specific and personal way. Not tired like she needed sleep. Tired like she needed something I couldn't name. I set the book down slowly. I looked at her, and I said, "Tell me what that means." She picked up the tea, put it down again without drinking it. "I don't know how to explain it yet," she said. "That's the problem." Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. We were 34 years old, both of us. We'd been married for 6 years at that point, together for 8. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the south end of Boston, the kind of neighborhood that smells like bakeries and old brick, and someone always has a dog that's too big for the sidewalk. She was a graphic designer who worked freelance from home. I was in urban infrastructure consulting, which is a long way of saying I helped cities figure out what to do with the land they had and not enough money to do anything with. We didn't have kids. We'd talked about it, put it off, talked about it again, put it off again. By the time we were sitting in that library, the topic had kind of drifted into a drawer neither of us opened very often. We weren't unhappy. That was the thing I kept turning over in my head that afternoon. We weren't in crisis. We didn't fight constantly. We didn't have some festering secret destroying things from the inside. We were just two people who had been building a shared life for 8 years, and somewhere in that building, one of us had quietly stopped recognizing her own reflection. I didn't panic that afternoon. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. My first instinct wasn't fear. It was something closer to respect. She'd said something real, something hard to say, and she'd said it to me, in a library, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, which told me she'd been carrying it for a while and had finally decided not to carry it alone. "Okay," I said. She looked at me like she was waiting for more. "Okay, as in you're not upset?" she asked. "Okay, as in I'm listening," I said. "And I want you to say the rest of it. Whatever the rest of it is." She looked out the window for a long moment. A man walked by outside, pushing a stroller with one hand and holding a coffee with the other, the universal posture of a parent who has learned to do everything one-handed. "I've just been feeling like I'm playing a role," she finally said. "Wife, partner, freelance designer, resident of apartment 4C. I do all of those things, but I don't know if I chose them or if I just sort of arrived at them. Did something specific happen?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "That's the terrifying part," she said. "Nothing happened. That's what I mean." We walked home from the library that evening in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence two people share when something significant has been said and they're both still digesting it. She made pasta for dinner. I opened a bottle of wine. We watched half an episode of something neither of us can probably name now, and then we sat in the kitchen with the second glasses of wine, and she said, "I think I need to do something that's just mine." "Like what?" I asked. "I don't know yet. That's the point. I don't know what I like anymore." She said it matter-of-factly, not dramatically, like she was reporting a finding rather than making a complaint. "Then let's figure it out," I said. "You say that like it's simple." "I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying it doesn't have to be lonely." She looked at me across the kitchen table. "I love you," she said. "I want you to know that. That's not what this is about." "I know," I said. And I did know. But I'll be honest, a small thing in me shifted that night. Something quiet and hard to name. Like a floorboard settling in a house that's been standing for years. You don't panic about it, but you notice. Her name was Nora. I can tell you that much. Nora with dark hair she kept in a loose braid most days. Nora who laughed at things that weren't technically jokes, but said them so drilly that you caught the humor 2 seconds later. Nora who had spent most of her 20s building a freelance career from scratch, which meant she'd spent most of her 20s alone at a desk with her own discipline as the only employee of the month. When we'd met, she was 26. She'd been sharp and funny and a little guarded, and I'd thought, here is a person worth the patience. And she was. She always had been. But somewhere in the years of shared leases and shared tax returns and shared grocery lists that always seemed to include things we were out of before I noticed, somewhere in all of that ordinary maintenance of a shared life, she'd started to feel like she was disappearing into the furniture. She didn't tell me that all at once. I learned it in pieces over the next several weeks. November arrived cold and fast in Boston that year. The kind of November that makes you question every life decision that resulted in you living north of Virginia. She started taking an evening painting class on Thursdays. She'd painted in college, she told me, and had completely stopped the moment she started working professionally in design because it felt like the same thing and also completely different, and she'd chosen the paycheck, which was the right choice but still a choice. I asked her once how the class was going. She came home smelling like turpentine, and she had a small blue smear on her wrist she hadn't noticed, and her eyes were different. Not brighter, exactly. More present. "It's good," she said. "Really good." I forgot what it felt like to make something with no client. No brief, no feedback cycle, no revision 3 of 7. I said. She pointed at me like I'd just answered a question correctly. "It's terrifying," she said. "And I keep making bad paintings. But they're mine." I told her that was worth something. She said she thought so too. And for a few weeks, things felt good. Genuinely good, not just settled. She was lighter. I was paying more attention because I'd been paying less, which is the kind of thing you only realize after someone holds up a mirror. The call from the Edinburgh office came on a Thursday morning in December. I work for a mid-sized firm with a handful of international partnerships, and we'd been in conversations for months about a major infrastructure redevelopment project in Scotland. A full rebuild and rezoning consultation for an urban district outside Edinburgh. 18 months, possibly 24. They wanted me to lead the on-site team. I sat in my office for a long time after that call ended. I ran the numbers. I thought about the timing. I thought about Nora and the library and the words she'd used. Lost. I went home that evening and told her about it over dinner. I laid it out without editorializing. The offer, the duration, the significance for my career. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "I wanted to tell you first." She was quiet for a moment. "This would be a big thing," she said. "Yeah. You'd be in Edinburgh for potentially 2 years. They'd cover quarterly flights back," I said. "We'd figure out the logistics." She nodded slowly. She looked at her plate. "Honestly," she said, "please, I think you should take it. I want to be clear about something." She didn't say it with distance. She didn't say it like she wanted me gone. She said it like she meant it. Like she'd genuinely turned the thought over and arrived at a conclusion she believed in. "You've been building towards something like this for years," she said. "And I've been," she paused, found the right word, "contracting. I've been getting smaller. And I think I need space to figure out what I actually am when I'm not half of something." "I'm not asking you to be half of something," I said. "I know you're not asking for it," she said. "But I think we got here anyway." I didn't argue with that. I wasn't sure I could. We talked until almost midnight. Logistically, practically, emotionally. She would keep the apartment. She had enough freelance work to be stable. Her best friend Petra lived 2 blocks away and had been trying to get her out more for the better part of a year. I would take the project. We would call every other day. We would visit quarterly at minimum. We would figure it out. "This isn't a separation," I said at one point. Very clearly, looking at her. "I know," she said. "It's space. There's a difference." "There's a big difference," she agreed. We went to bed that night the way you go to bed after a conversation that changes things. Side by side. Quiet. Both staring at the ceiling for longer than either of us admitted. I flew to Edinburgh the second week of January. I remember standing in the Boston airport at 5 in the morning with a carry-on and a sense of having done something irreversible, even though on paper everything was perfectly reasonable and decided. Nora had dropped me off. She'd hug me at the curb the way you hug someone when you want to get the hug right. Deliberate. Both arms, no half measures. She smelled like the shampoo she'd been using since I'd known her, and I pressed my face into her shoulder for just a second longer than was casual. "I'll call when I land," I said. "I'll be awake," she said. She was. We talked for 40 minutes while I sat in a rental flat in Edinburgh's new town with the heating system making sounds I didn't fully trust, and the January sky outside already the particular shade of gunmetal gray that I would come to know very well. She told me about her Thursday class. I told her about the flat. It felt normal, comfortable, like 2 people who loved each other and had made a reasonable plan. The first 3 months were productive in every measurable way. The Edinburgh project was genuinely interesting work. a district that had been through 2 rounds of failed regeneration attempts and was now getting a proper multi-year commitment from the city. My team was good. There was Owen, a Scottish civil engineer with a dry wit and an accent I had to concentrate on for the first 2 weeks. There was Claudette, a French urban planner who had opinions about everything and was right about most of them. There was a rotating cast of local consultants and subcontractors who brought the kind of ground-level knowledge that you can't import. I was busy in a way that was satisfying rather than draining. I called Nora every other day like we'd agreed. She told me about the painting class, which had extended into a full semester. She told me about a book club Petra had dragged her into. She told me about a short hiking trip she'd taken with 3 women from the painting class, up in Vermont for a long weekend. I told her about Owen and about a pub we'd found near the office that had a proper fireplace. I told her about the project. She asked good questions. She laughed at the right moments. It felt, honestly, like the most connected we'd been in years. I remember saying that to her once. "Doesn't that bother you a little?" she said. "That distance made it easier?" "I think it made it slower," I said. "We're not trying to fit each other into the margins. We're actually stopping and talking." She said. "What?" "Nothing," she said. "That's a good point. I just think it's something to think about." I thought about it. I wasn't sure what conclusion I was supposed to reach. My first visit back was in April. I landed on a Friday evening. She picked me up from the airport. She looked different. Not dramatically. Not like someone had swapped her out. But something in the way she carried herself was changed. She was standing at the arrivals gate with her hands in her jacket pockets, and she was looking around with this easy alertness, like she was comfortable just being somewhere. The Nora I'd left in January had a habit of folding into herself in public spaces. Arms crossed, shoulders slightly up. This woman at the arrivals gate was just standing there, fully upright, watching the doors like she had nowhere else to be and was fine with that. I kissed her and it was good. We went home and ordered food from the Thai place 2 streets over, and she told me about the last few months and I told her about mine, and somewhere around 11 o'clock she said, "I've been happier." "I can tell," I said. "You look good." "I mean actually happier," she said. "Not just less unhappy. There's a difference." "I know there's a difference. I've been doing things," she said. "The hiking, the painting. I signed up for a ceramics workshop that starts in May. Petra and I have been cooking dinner together every Sunday. Simple things." "Those aren't small things," I said. "No," she agreed. "They're not." She looked at me with something I couldn't fully read. "I want to keep doing them," she said. "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't you?" She nodded, didn't say anything else. And I filed that pause in a folder in the back of my mind and didn't open it for another several months. The visit was 4 days. It was good, genuinely good. We walked around the South End. We had dinner with Petra and her husband, a quiet man named Qley who built furniture by hand in his garage and spoke maybe 40 words the entire evening, and all of them were worth hearing. We went to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum on the last day because Nora had mentioned wanting to go back there, and we hadn't been in years. She stood in front of a Rembrandt for a long time, not saying anything, just looking. I stood next to her. I thought, I am very lucky. I also thought, I don't know what she's thinking, and I can usually tell. I flew back to Edinburgh on Tuesday. She stood at the curb again. This time when she hugged me, she pulled back first. Not coldly, just efficiently, like the hug had done what hugs are for. "I'll call Thursday," I said. "Thursday," she agreed. I got in the taxi. I watched her walk back toward the building. She didn't turn around. The second stretch in Edinburgh was longer. April to September, 5 months before my next scheduled visit. The project had moved into a complex phase, and I couldn't step away easily, and we'd agreed that she'd come to Edinburgh instead for the August visit. She arrived on a Wednesday evening. I picked her up from Waverley Station, and she stepped off the train with a single duffel bag and a look of genuine curiosity about the city around her. We spent 6 days together. I showed her the project site, which she found genuinely interesting in the way people who understand space and design tend to find urban planning interesting. She asked Owen sharp questions about the zoning work, and he looked mildly startled that someone's spouse was asking about load distribution and brownfield remediation. After she left, Owen said, "Your wife's good." "I know," I said. "Does she know that?" he said. I thought about that question more than I should have. The Edinburgh visit was mostly good, but there were moments. On the 3rd night we were lying in the flat, and she was looking at the ceiling, and she said, "I've been thinking about getting a studio space." "For painting," I said, "and ceramics. Maybe other things. I don't know. I just feel like I need a dedicated place. A place that's just for making things." "That sounds great," I said. It would cost money, she said. I'd probably need to take on more commercial work to offset it. We can figure out the finances, I said. I know, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud. Then, a beat later, I've also been thinking about maybe taking a course at MassArt in the spring. An art course. A certificate program. Mixed media and installation. It's intense. It's 2 evenings a week, plus Saturdays for 6 months. Okay, I said. She turned her head to look at me. Okay, she said. Just okay. I mean, yes. It sounds right for where you are. She watched me for a moment. You're being very supportive, she said. I'm trying to be. I know, she said. I notice it. Is something wrong with being supportive? She was quiet for a few seconds. No, she said. Nothing's wrong with it. There was a conversation on the 5th day that I've replayed many times since. We'd gone for a walk up to Calton Hill to watch the city at dusk. Edinburgh below us, the castle lit up on one end and Arthur's Seat dark and massive on the other, and the whole city spread out in between like something from a different century. She said, "Can I ask you something?" Of course. When you imagine coming home, she said, what does it look like? I thought about it. The apartment, I said. You. Probably dinner somewhere good to celebrate. Eventually getting back to normal. Normal, she repeated. Not critically. Just the word, sitting there in the cold air. What would you want it to look like? I asked. She looked out at the city for a long time. I don't know yet, she said. She said it the same way she'd said it in the library 18 months ago. I don't know yet. And I understood then that she wasn't being evasive. She genuinely didn't know. But I also understood that the not knowing had changed. In the library, she hadn't known what she'd lost. Standing on Calton Hill, she didn't know what she was becoming. Those are 2 very different kinds of not knowing. She went back to Boston. I went back to work. We called every other day, but something was different now. Not worse. Different. The calls felt slightly more careful, like we were both being considerate of something fragile without naming the fragile thing. She got the studio space in October, a shared workspace in Somerville with other artists and makers. She texted me a photo of it the day she got the keys. Small room, concrete floor, one large north-facing window, a single wooden work table, paint cans already lined up along one wall, even though she'd only had the keys for an hour. She looked completely at home in it. I stared at that photo for a long time. I texted back, "It's perfect." She sent back a single heart. December brought the project to a milestone that meant I could take a proper break. 3 weeks in Boston. Real time, not a visit. I landed in a snowstorm. She picked me up. We went home. And within 48 hours, I understood something that the phone calls had hidden from me. The apartment was different. Not the apartment itself. Her relationship to it. When I'd left, 2 years ago, she'd been someone who inhabited a space she shared. Now she was someone who had a life, and an apartment was part of it. Her studio schedule was on the wall. Her reading pile had grown into 2 stacks. A large canvas was propped against the living room wall that she'd brought home to photograph. The kitchen had a different energy because she was cooking more now. Really cooking, not just making food. Sunday dinners with Petra were a fixture. She had inside jokes with people I'd never met. She had a rhythm, and I was stepping into it as a guest. Not because she made me feel like one. She didn't. She was genuinely glad I was there. But I could feel the outline of a life that had been built without a space designed for me. The first week was fine. The second week is when the real conversation started. We were in the kitchen on a Wednesday night. She was making a risotto with the particular focused attention she brought to things she decided to take seriously. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, watching her, and she said, without turning around, "I need to tell you something." "Okay," I said. She stirred, kept her back to me for another moment. Then she turned around and leaned against the counter. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said. "Since March." "Okay," I said. "And we've been working through a lot of things," she said. "About me. About who I was before the marriage. About what I want." "That sounds like good work," I said. "It is," she said. "It's been hard and good." She looked at me steadily. "Some of what I've been working through involves us," she said. "I figured," I said. "I've been sitting with something for a few months," she said. "And I want to talk about it. Not tonight, necessarily. But I want you to know it's there." "What is it?" She put the spoon down on the ceramic rest beside the stove. The one she'd made in her ceramics workshop. "I've been trying to figure out," she said carefully, "whether I want the marriage I thought I was building, or whether I want the life I've been building since you left." The risotto was going to need stirring. Neither of us moved toward it. "Those can't coexist," I said. She looked at me with something that was not unkind. "I don't know," she said. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." That night was long. We ate the risotto. We talked around the edges of it without going fully in. She wasn't ending things. She was being honest about a question she hadn't resolved yet. I respected that. I also felt the floor shifting under me in a way that I hadn't felt since the library 2 years ago. The first time she'd said she was lost, I leaned toward her. Now I was sitting across a kitchen table watching her describe a map she'd drawn without me in it, and I didn't know which way to lean. I lay awake until 3 in the morning. I thought about 8 years. I thought about the airport curb and the hug that had ended efficiently. I thought about the Edinburgh apartment and the Calton Hill question. I thought about the word normal and how she'd repeated it without commentary. I thought about the studio photo. The paintkins lined up like small soldiers. Her looking completely at home. We had the real conversation 4 days later. Sunday afternoon, after she'd been to her studio in the morning. She came home with paint on her hands and sat across from me at the kitchen table. She said, "I don't think I know how to be who I was for 8 years and also be who I've become. And I've tried to imagine it from every angle I have, and I can't find the way they fit together." "You haven't tried," I said. "I've been in Edinburgh." "I know," she said. "And honestly, the fact that it took you being in Edinburgh for me to find myself should tell us both something." "It tells me we needed to adjust some things," I said. "Not that we should end things." "I know you see it that way," she said. "How do you see it?" She took a breath. "I see it as proof that the thing I was lost in was the structure," she said. "Not a bad marriage. Not a cruel husband. Not a disaster. Just a structure that was eating me quietly. And now I've spent 2 years outside of it. And I'm not lost anymore. So what does that mean?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I think I've changed enough that the person I am now would have to choose differently than the person I was when I said yes to this." The silence after that was the kind you feel physically, like pressure in your ears. "You're asking for a divorce," I said. "I'm saying I've arrived at a truth I didn't want to arrive at," she said. "And I've been honest with you because you deserve that. Because you've been nothing but decent." "Decent," I said. The word landed wrong. "That's not," she started. "No, I know what you mean," I said. I stopped. I looked at the table. "I love you," I said. "And I think you love me." "I do," she said immediately. "That's the part that doesn't make sense from the outside. I love you, and I also know that going back to who we were is the same as going backwards." "We don't have to go backwards," I said. "We could build something new." She looked at me with something that was close to tenderness and also close to finality. "You keep saying we," she said quietly. "And I keep thinking I didn't respond to that. There wasn't a response. She was right. Not about everything, but about the shape of it. She had spent 2 years learning the singular, and I had spent 2 years being the plural of a marriage that was reconfiguring itself without my full knowledge. I hadn't been abandoned. I hadn't been lied to. I had, with good intentions and genuine love, stepped out of the frame long enough for the picture to change. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Not because of cruelty, because of its absence. There was no villain in this story. No one to be furious at. No betrayal to point to. Just 2 people who had been genuinely good to each other, navigating the aftermath of a transformation that only one of them had been present for. We talked every day. We cried, both of us, at different points. She was consistent and clear. Not cold, but clear. She didn't change her mind. I went back to Edinburgh to finish the project. The last 4 months. I walked out of that Boston apartment with my carry-on and my chest full of something I didn't have a word for. She stood at the door this time, not the curb. She hugged me. Properly. Both arms. No efficiency. "I'm sorry," she said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "I'm still glad I know you," she said. "Me too." I walked to the elevator. I didn't look back. Not because I was angry. Because I knew if I did I'd lose whatever composure I had, and I wanted to carry myself out of there with some dignity intact. The last 4 months in Edinburgh were a kind of grief I hadn't prepared for. Not the dramatic grief of a sudden loss. The quiet grief of something that dissolved slowly enough that you couldn't point to the exact moment it was gone. Owen noticed I wasn't right. He brought me a very bad cup of coffee from the terrible machine in the side office one morning and set it down in front of me and said, "You don't have to tell me what's happening, but you should talk to someone." "I'm fine," I said. He gave me a look that communicated everything he thought about that particular sentence. I called my brother that evening. His name is Conrad. He's 3 years older than me and lives in Vancouver with his partner and their 2 kids, and he has the very useful quality of listening without immediately trying to solve. I told him everything. He listened. Then he said, "So she found herself and it turned out she was someone different than you thought she was." "I think that's accurate." I said. That's not a betrayal, he said. I know, I said. That's what makes it hard to be angry. Is being angry something you're trying to do? I thought about it. I think I want to be angry, I said. Because anger would mean there's something to fix or assign or make sense of. But there isn't. She's not wrong. She's just not. I stopped. She's not the person who would have chosen you, Conrad said. The sentence sat on me like a stone. Yeah, I said. That's a hard thing to hold, he said. Yeah. We talked for another 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Nora. Football. His kids. A hiking trail he'd done in September. Normal things. It was the kindest gift he could have given me. I finished the Edinburgh project in late May. The final report went in on a Thursday afternoon. Owen took the whole team out to the pub with the fireplace. We had several rounds. Claudette gave a speech about the project that was unexpectedly moving. Owen shook my hand at the end of the night and said, "You did good work here." "We did good work," I said. "Sure," he said. "But you held this together through a difficult personal period and nobody had to carry extra weight because of it." That's not nothing. I flew home the following Tuesday. Except home was complicated now. The Boston apartment was going through the legal process. We'd been fair about it. She was keeping it, taking over the lease fully. I was staying with Conrad temporarily until I figured out the next move. But I was flying into Boston for a week to deal with logistics. She met me at a coffee shop in the South End. Neutral ground. She looked well. Really well. Better, honestly, than I'd seen her look in years. Not that she'd looked bad before. But this was something else. She looked settled in herself. Comfortable. Like all the furniture of her inner life was finally where she'd put it, and she knew where everything was. We talked for almost 3 hours. Not about the legal stuff. About the last 2.5 years. About what had happened between the library and this coffee shop. About what we'd each learned. She said, "I know this hurt you." "It did," I said. "I'm not going to pretend the way I got to where I needed to be wasn't painful for you." "No. But I also know you're going to be okay," she said. "You're better at your work than you've ever been. You grew in Edinburgh. I could see it in the calls. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" I said, not unkindly. She smiled slightly. "Not entirely," she said. "But it's true." We sat with it for a moment. I asked her about the studio. She lit up. Not in a performed way. Just naturally. The way people light up about things that genuinely matter to them. She was working on a series of large installations. She'd been approached by a small gallery in Cambridge about showing work in the spring. She was teaching a one-day workshop for beginners next month. She was painting again with the kind of intensity she'd had at 22 and had spent a decade slowly burying under practicality. I listened, and I felt something I hadn't expected, something that sat alongside the grief. Not joy exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. She had found the thing she'd almost let go of. She had found it by going through something that had cost us both significantly. But she had found it. And some part of me, the part that had always genuinely loved her, could not be completely unmoved by that. "Can I tell you something?" I said. "Of course." "In the library, that afternoon 2 years ago," I said, "when you said you'd lost yourself, I told you we could figure it out together. And I meant it. I know you did. But I think I meant it in a way where I was still imagining staying in the center of whatever you figured out," I said. She was quiet. "I didn't know that was what I was doing," I said. "But I think that's what I was doing. Supporting your growth as long as the growth came back to me." She looked at me carefully. "When did you figure that out?" she asked. "On Calton Hill," I said. "When you asked me what coming home would look like, and I said normal, and you said nothing." She absorbed that. "I don't think you did anything wrong," she said. "I know," I said. "That's also not the point." She nodded slowly. "You deserved someone whose map already had you on it," I said. "You deserved someone who knew what she wanted before she built a life around it," she said. We sat in that for a while. Two people who had been very good to each other, arriving finally at the honest version of a conversation they'd been working toward for 2.5 years. The apartment was officially hers by August. I had moved to a furnished place in Cambridge while I figured out the next chapter. The Edinburgh project had led to a follow-on offer with a different firm doing similar work, this time in Glasgow and possibly Lisbon. I took a month before deciding anything. I needed to be in one place first, to stop moving and just sit with what was. I went to the public library, not the Boston Public Library, a smaller branch library in Cambridge with low ceilings and the particular smell of old paperback fiction and industrial carpet cleaner. I sat in the corner. I didn't read. I just sat. I thought about the last 8 years. Not with regret, exactly. More the way you think about something that happened that you can neither fully celebrate nor fully mourn. We'd been good to each other. We'd been honest, in the end. She'd been brave enough to name the thing that was wrong before it rotted. I'd been willing to hear it. We'd both made the choices we made. And this is where those choices had led. Not to disaster. Not to scandal. Just to an ending that was real and quiet and permanent. In September, 6 months after I'd come back from Edinburgh, I ran into her at a farmer's market in the South End. Not a dramatic encounter. The most ordinary thing. We were both reaching for the same bunch of heirloom tomatoes at a produce stall, and we both laughed. She was with a woman from her studio. I was alone. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. She mentioned the gallery show was confirmed for February. I told her about the Glasgow option. She said Glasgow was worth going to if the work was good. I said I thought it was. The woman from the studio was politely looking at something else. Before I left, Nora said, "I hope you find something that's just yours." She said it the way she'd said things in the library. Matter-of-factly, like she was reporting a genuine wish. "I think I'm starting to," I said. She nodded once. I walked away. I didn't turn around this time either. Not because it hurt too much. Just because it was over, and I knew how to carry that now. I took the Glasgow project. I started it in October. A smaller team than Edinburgh. Different city, different energy. Older buildings and steeper hills and a directness in the people that I found I needed. I rented a flat in the West End and I bought a decent coffee maker and I found a pub on a cobblestone street where they had good whiskey and didn't ask questions. I worked. I called Conrad twice a week. I read more than I had in years. Real reading. The kind where you lose track of time and look up startled. I started running in the mornings, which I hadn't done since my late 20s. Not to fix anything. Just because I was building a routine, and routine is the scaffold you put up when you're rebuilding something. There is a version of this story where I'm the victim, where a woman woke up one day and decided to reinvent herself at my expense, where I am the collateral damage of someone else's self-discovery. I've sat with that version. I've had dark nights where it felt true, but it isn't accurate, and I don't think honesty is served by pretending otherwise. She told me in a library that she was losing herself. I heard her. I encouraged her. I took a project abroad partly for my career and partly, if I'm honest, because I believed giving her space was the same as giving us room. I was right about the space. I was wrong about the us. Those two things can both be true. The gallery show was in February. She sent me an invitation via email. Not with pressure, just with information. I flew back to Boston for a long weekend in March. I went to the show. She had 12 pieces. Large, unsettling, beautiful canvases. The kind of work that makes you feel like something is being said directly to you even though it predates knowing you exist. I stood in front of the largest one for a long time. It was dark at the edges and open at the center, and there was a figure in it, barely there, just implied, turning towards something you couldn't see from where you stood. I didn't need her to explain it to me. She came over after a while. She was dressed well. Her hair was down, which she rarely wore. She looked like herself, her actual self, in a way that was almost difficult to look at directly. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course," I said. I gestured toward the large canvas. "This one," I said. She looked at it. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It's extraordinary," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "I know that wasn't an easy thing to say," she said. "It wasn't," I said. "But it's true." We stood next to each other in front of the painting for another minute. Not touching, not talking. Just two people who had been important to each other, standing in the presence of what that importance had eventually produced. Then I went to find a glass of wine, and she went to greet someone near the door, and that was that. I finished the Glasgow project in 18 months. By then I had a better idea of who I was outside of a marriage. Not a fixed idea, not a finished one, but a clearer one. I knew I was someone who did his best work when it was hard and under-resourced. I knew I was someone who needed to be told the difficult truth rather than managed. I knew I had a capacity for loyalty that was, in the right circumstances, a strength, and in the wrong ones had functioned as a kind of willful blindness. I knew I had been a good husband in all the measurable ways and had missed some of the unmeasurable ones. I knew that none of that made me a bad person, just a person. I'm not going to tell you I've arrived somewhere triumphant. That's not what this story is. There was no revelation that made everything make sense. There was no moment where I stood somewhere beautiful and understood the universe. There was just a gradual accumulation of mornings, each one slightly more mine than the last, each one a little less defined by the shape of what I'd lost, and a little more defined by the shape of what I was still building. Conrad's youngest kid called me his cool uncle. I found a firm in Edinburgh with a partner I trusted and work that mattered. I started a small vegetable garden in the postage stamp yard behind my flat, which I am genuinely terrible at, but refuse to give up. Some nights I sit with a whiskey and think about the library. About that Tuesday afternoon in October with the light coming through the tall, arched windows. About the way she'd said it. So quietly. I think I lost myself somewhere in this marriage. I didn't lose her that day. She was only just beginning to be found. And I had the enormous privilege and the painful misfortune of being the person who encouraged her to go looking. She found what she was looking for. I'm still finding mine. That's the real ending. Not a door slamming. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not someone turning out to be monstrous. Just two people who loved each other, genuinely, being slowly pointed in different directions by the compass of who they each actually were. Some things can't be saved by good intentions. Some things that end weren't failures. And some kinds of love do exactly what they were supposed to do. They hold you long enough for you to become someone. Even when that someone turns out to belong to a different story.